Dream big, never stop dreaming, because you can do whatever that you want as long as you believe in your dreams.
Welcome to the Dare to Dream Productions podcast. Please welcome Chicago-based filmmaker Stephen Cohn. His films explore coming of age, self-identity, sexuality, and religion. The rawness and character growth throughout his films touch the hearts of many and provide each audience member connection to each character. His films have played in festivals across the world. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. I know that the world's falling apart, but it feels, at least today, it feels nice outside, and I'm in a good mood, and everything's good in my little world. So, and just hoping, the best for everybody and for yourself.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely Are you in Chicago?
I am.
Definitely feels like fall.
It does. I love it a lot, actually.
I would love to begin by talking about your creative process. Your films seem really personal. How do you find the inspiration for them?
Well, the ones so far have largely been based on either, the sort of world that I grew up in and the experiences that I had growing up. I was my dad's a Southern Baptist minister. He's still a Southern Baptist minister. I grew up in the Carolinas. I grew up in the church. And so, several of these films deal directly with those experiences and my experiences in that world, the evangelical world specifically. And even Cyd, even though Cyd's not about the church, it's very much about that dynamic between soul searching adolescence, trying to figure out who you are, encountering different points of view, new cities, new seasons, that sense of transformation. So, certainly growing up in the 90s as a minister's kid in South Carolina, knowing I was probably queer, loving movies, trying to reconcile all of these things. I guess it makes sense that years later it would still be, those sorts of things would be seeping into the work. So none of it, there's no point at which I was like, I'm going to tell stories about teenagers, or, there was no sort of outside strategic decision. It was just like, what world do I want to go into? What environment do I want to go into? And it just happened to be the environment in which I was a teenager. So it's really more of like a decision about what part of my life to explore and what, it's not nostalgia, but it's like, let me go back here and see what I can dig up, And then, cut to, suddenly you're a coming of age filmmaker, but it's sort of a backwards thing. Like I'm not strategizing. I'm just like, where do I want to go now?
That's awesome. Do you think you're going to explore like a different type of film?
Yeah, well, every time I say that, I notice new things and new scripts that harken back to the same themes. I imagine the same themes will keep coming up, but certainly in the writing that I've done since these movies, the sort of teen movies happened, the ages are varying a little bit. I'm writing things about adults now, maybe because I exhausted the teenage sexual, search for identity thing, but they're still there. Those themes of transformation and finding yourself, they'll probably never go away.
I think that's really important too, especially like now it's kind of changing, especially like in the South. So maybe you could explore that too.
When you're ready to scale up and make movies for more money, it takes a longer time. And so you want to have a bunch of things ready just to see what happens first. But one of the things is very much a exploration of the South and older characters. And so we'll see what happens. But yes, I love the South. I love movies and stories that look at the South in a way that's not condescending or patronizing, that actually kind of respects it as a multi-dimensional universe. And so I hope to continue to be able to contribute to that, because I do love it very much, even though it's messed up in a lot of ways. but so is every region.
Hmm. Very true. And I'm excited to learn more about that, hopefully, or see that film one day.
Yeah, me too. I'm ready. I'm ready for it to exist.
So religion seems to be a theme you explore in each of your films, specifically connected to being in the LGBT plus community. Can you talk a little bit about the role religion plays?
Yeah, well, like I said, and my dad is still a minister. I grew up going to going to church 3 times a week. It was my life. I mean, everything, even summers, it was like, when is music camp? When is youth camp? When is the lock-in? When is, uh, what youth activities do I have going on this week? I mean, it was like, and I started a Bible club in high school. I ran a Bible club. So like was immersed myself in this world because of, my family. And I should say it was largely a pleasant experience. I mean, there was lots of anxiety and, yes, there were dark pockets of hypocrisy and pain and stuff like that. But mostly it was cool to like go to into this community multiple times a week, and it was always a little bit like, it felt a little bit cool being the preacher's son too, like it's like, you're sort of like the star kid in church or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it was also a very conservative world. And you realize, oh, a lot of the things that I'm feeling are not really warmly welcomed here. And what, again, I mean, all of this is in Wise Kids and Henry Gamble and everything, and I guess to a certain extent Cyd, but it's like, what do you do when you're taught certain things about traditional family values, or quote unquote traditional family values? What do you do with your feelings that might not line up with those teachings? And it's not, again, it's not just painful, and I hope this comes out in the films too. It's also really exciting to like have these weird, potentially forbidden feelings at the same time that you're like discovering pop music, and and you're going on these youth trips, and you're developing crushes, and then you're going to church services. I mean, it's just like this like insane mix of really primal, kind of sensual, powerful emotions, and some of them are religious and some of them are sexual. So it's like, that's where it all comes from. And so I mean, that's where these movies have largely come from. It's like, I want to go back and speaking of going back into world, just like, I want to go back into that world and explore that excitement and the thrill of, thinking about hell and eternity and heaven and salvation at the same time that I'm thinking about sex and puberty and all that stuff. I mean, it's a wild time.
Mm-hmm. Is there an intention you have for making it such a major theme?
No, it's just like what excites me. I'm not a very strategic person. I haven't spent a lot of time thinking like, what movie do I need to make it in the industry. It's like it's just so, the process is so personal to me that it would never occur to me to do anything else. So it's like, what do I want to do? That list is short, so I'll do one of these.
I love that, because I feel like that's when you make your best work, if it is personal.
I was actually talking to the cinematographer of Princess Cyd last night. Oh. And I was telling her, I was like, I'm finally writing, in addition to the project I mentioned to you already, finally writing, I have this sort of pseudo children's fantasy thing, and I have this thriller and these genre inflected things that I'm working on. And the reason that I am writing in that realm for the first time in like 15 years of making movies is that I haven't had an idea in that world that excited me. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's like, I just haven't, it just took me a long time to like reconcile my sort of desire to make personal work with like, oh, here's a package, here's a sort of thriller, detective, or fantasy package that I think I could do and not feel like I'm compromising my own sensibility, and will be very exciting. So all of this is a long-winded way of saying I just haven't spent a lot of time over the last 15 years thinking about what I should write. It's really been like what's really exciting to me to make. And sorry, and now I'm talking too much, but it's also budgetary. It's also like a lot of these movies were conceived in the fall to make in the summer. So it's like, it can't be that big, because I know I'm going to raise all the money myself, and it's got to be made super cheap, and that these stories are conducive to that process.
Very cool. I didn't know that you financed them all by yourself. Can you talk a little bit about that? And congrats. That's like definitely a feat.
Oh, the movies wouldn't exist otherwise. I mean, I've always said my impatience, my lack of patience and willingness to wait on things has been both my strength and my weakness, because, the upside is that I have taken it upon myself to make sure that the movies happen, and I am beholden to no one. This applies before now. Now that I'm trying to make larger films, it does not apply anymore. But prior, I'm beholden to no one. I'm my own boss. I'm going to beg for money till I get it, and then I'm going to make the movie on this date. I mean, that was how I operated for 10 years. The downside to that is that you're maybe not taking as much time as you should to develop a screenplay, and you're not giving yourself time to create relationships with organizations or apply for grants. So it's like, upside is movie, one after the other, every year. Downside is no one is really telling me the screenplay is not ready to go. I'm not really taking time to develop it, for better and for worse. Maybe, some of these movies probably benefited from being made quickly. Others, like Black Box, the movie I mentioned to you before we started, that was a movie that is very interesting for a lot of people, but it didn't find its footing in film culture, largely because I probably rushed it. So there are pros and cons, but yeah, no, it's always, but for these movies, it was me saying, I'm going to make a movie in a couple months or 4 months or 6 months or whatever, and everyone come along and here we go. And then I do it.
That's really fast.
Oh, you have no idea how fast. I mean, the Princess Cyd happened, so it's a whole other story. Well, okay, Wise Kids, Henry Gamble, they were a little more normal. Black Box, I would conceive of them maybe a year prior, maybe 8 months prior. I would write them more or less over the holidays, continue writing up until casting in the spring, and then shoot in July or August. So the longest period was a year. The shortest period for Cyd was I'm embarrassed at how quickly, I'm proud and embarrassed at how quickly Cyd happened, because this other movie that I mentioned to you, the Southern thing, was gonna come after Henry Gamble, and I was continuing with my reckless behavior, and I was like, I'm gonna do this next. It's gonna be like 3 or 4 times the budget that I've been used to, but I've proven in the past that I can make something super fast, so I'm gonna make this one fast. Thankfully, I smartened up in early 2016 and was like, why would, for your first larger budgeted film, would you rush it? That's stupid. So I somehow developed the discipline to say, no, let's not do this one. And then it's the craziest I've ever been. And I don't even say this to brag. This is very much a do not try this at home thing. But at the end of June, I was like, I want to do something. And conceived of the project, adapted an idea I'd had for a little while, very loose, conceived of the project around the last couple of weeks of June. I wrote it, I think, the week after July 4th. And then we were shooting August 30th.
Whoa.
So Cyd was written, the first draft was written in about 3 days. The whole thing was written in about just a couple of weeks. And then we started prepping it 3 weeks later, and then we were shooting. So from conception to the first cut, which very much resembles the movie you saw, was mid-June to mid-October.
Wow, that's insane.
It's genuinely insane, and you can see why I like would not advise anyone do that. But, you know, and I only say that because it could very easily have gone the other way. And all the people who trusted me with their money and trusted me with their talent could have had a total, complete disaster on their hands if I had not, you know, if I had failed to come up with the money that I promised, if the movie had turned out badly, then I would have lost the faith of dozens, you know, like 100 people. So I'm very lucky that it turned out well. I probably could not have written a decent draft of something that quickly if I hadn't had 10 to 12 years of prior experience. Again, Black Box was sort of the cautionary flip side of that. Another movie I made, $100,000 feature, that didn't turn out that great, and a lot of people placed their trust in me and gave me money, and I was like, I didn't have much to show for it. I mean, it did have a life. It played a couple festivals, but in no way was... So I have this example of Black Box happening quickly, not doing so well. Cyd being written quickly, made quickly, and then it made a mark in the film culture. So it was a big risk, but it's very fast. So now I'm out of this mode though. I've stopped, you know, that was 10 years of me just like basically waking up every morning thinking, where am I going to get 20,000 today? Where am I going to get 100 grand by June? Where, you know, like just a lot of time, a lot of my days over the last decade was just like me being like, why do I do this? Why did I just tell everyone I'm making a movie? Now I have to do it. And then I'm glad I did it, but you can see how the pressure can get, how you can start to want like help and producers and other people to raise money for me, you know? So that's the world I'm moving into now. I like that the pressure's off. I don't like how long it takes.
Did you do like crowdsourcing, or how did you find the money?
I only did crowdsourcing, really only did it once for the Wise Kids. The Wise Kids was $60,000, and I raised, I think, 17.5 on Kickstarter, and then like 40 or whatever the remainder is from private investors. No, a lot of it is, you'll notice if you go on IMDb, these movies have like 30 producers, and that's because it's like 30 people who are giving me anywhere from $500 to $10,000. Or, you know, I've had a couple people write me, you know, say, okay, I can't believe I'm doing this. I believe in you. Here's 20 grand. You know, most people though, it's like $5,000 investment, $10,000 investment. But it's as direct a fundraising effort as could possibly be. It's me saying, hey, friends, do you know anyone who might like to support a film and be a producer? And they say, you can ask my uncle, you can ask my uncle's whatever. And so then I just start contacting a lot of strangers. And I'm like, this is who I am. This is the project. This is what I've done before. I can't promise you your money back, but I'm just looking for help. You know, 95% of the time they say no, but you make the movie off the 5% of the time that they say yes. But it's very exhausting, and if your will is so powerful that you refuse to not have an empty bank account, it will get done. But it can become incredibly irresponsible very fast. If you start committing to your actors and your team that you're going to have this much money in the bank by this date, you can't promise that unless you are 100% going to do it. Or else you'll lose the faith of people, of future collaborators.
That's good advice. I'm like hoping to one day do a feature like very soon, so.
Yeah, well, the flip side of all of this is that there would be a lot of filmmakers who would sit here and say to you that they worked on their passion project on a script for 2 or 3 years, and then they started submitting it to developmental labs, and then it went through a process of building organizational support, and they went that way. So that's a whole other way of doing it. Some would say it's a much smarter, more sane way. In my case, I was just like, I just want to make a movie per year no matter what. I know some of them will fall flat on their face, some won't, but I just want to keep making. But a lot of people have built careers from really spending time nurturing that one thing, and that's very smart, and it should be strongly considered. But for people who want inspiration on the other method, the crazier method, I stand available for advice.
So self-identity is another important theme in your films, and you write a lot of female characters. Cyd is one of my favorite characters, and she goes on a journey of self-discovery. What was it like writing a female character who's queer? And did you work with a female writer to assure that you were writing a genuine perspective?
Female characters have always interested me more than male characters. Grew up with a mother and a sister that I love very dearly. Most of my best friends in high school and adulthood are females. So, you know, there are a lot of really incredible, complicated females in the real world that I love very much, that I've spent a lot of time with. I understand that doesn't automatically mean that I can write them well. I can't say that in my past 10 to 15 years of writing female characters, I've sort of just tried to imagine them well. Like, that's the short answer. And then if someone wants to call bullshit, they can call bullshit. But to answer your question, I don't work with a co-writer. I didn't work with a co-writer on Cyd, but what I did do was, I told you about that very fast draft that I wrote. I had someone named Marion Hill, who was a queer female recent grad of Northwestern, and a friend of mine, who ended up being assistant editor on the film and sort of co-directing the sex scene with me, and cutting the sex scene with me. I gave her the draft, and I gave Grace Hahn, my producer, who had also recently graduated from Northwestern. So 2 recent graduates of Northwestern, both female, 1 queer. And I said to myself, I just wrote this thing very fast. I'm going to show it to Grace and Marion. And if they tell me that it passes muster, I'm going to make it. And if they tell me that it doesn't, I won't. And so what I did do for the first time is give the script to 2 young women and say, is this alive? Does this ring true? Does this feel right? And they both said yes. And I continued to work with them as well as with female DP. So all female production team, producers. It was everybody in charge except for me was female, basically. And literally the gaze, the physical visual gaze of the film is female, in terms of who's looking through the camera. So we did it. We did it, and and it is what it is. And I guess, yeah, my take on that sort of thing is like, it's just a case by case basis. Are you imagining this piece in the best, most evocative, most respectful way that you can? Whether you're co-writing, whether you're getting advice, who are you hiring? It's very hard to, I think, make sort of blanket rules about these things. It's just like, you just kind of have to do your best. But it's ultimately an imaginative exercise. You're just trying to imagine successfully. And there will certainly be people there to tell you that you're not doing it successfully if you're not. But anyway, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that you had all females in your crew. I think that's really important, especially because it is a film about females.
Totally. But I should say, we never sat down and strategized that. That sometimes it does come out of just being smart and putting together the best team. It doesn't always have to be, sitting around a table figuring out, you know, as a committee, like, how do we best achieve representation? Like, sometimes the representation, when everyone's being smart and taking risks and being imaginative, sometimes it happens automatically and organically. And, you know, that's why occasionally you'll find incredible examples in storytelling and production of movies from the 20s or 40s or 50s or 70s of like, oh, they did it right back then, and people weren't even having these discussions. Well, that's because they just made really smart, interesting decisions. So, you know, sometimes it happens without anyone deciding that it's going to, which I think is kind of ideal, because it means that you're firing on all cylinders and your antenna's out.
And it should just definitely be based on like the talent, not like you're checking off like a list.
Oh, and it should be fun to do. It should be like, what is the baddest ass team that we can put together? The chances of that team being largely female are very good.
So do you have any advice for independent filmmakers?
A lot of it you just heard in my insane story of how quickly these movies happen. But, you know, my best piece of practical advice, well, first of all, before we even get into the realm of advice, it's a cliche, but the best advice really is kind of make your own way and don't listen to anybody. I mean, that's all, that should be a given. Like it's such a weird time and weird process that you kind of should have to make your own rules. And there are exceptions to all of these things, but the first thing I usually say is set the date. I mean, don't wait until you're ready. Just sort of set the date, give yourself a time to prep and create a project. But like, if you're like, if someone's like, I really want to make a short film, but I don't know what to make, and I'm talking to my friends about doing it sometime, that is, you're dooming yourself. You're dooming yourself to still be talking about it in 3 years. So what I always suggest is a short film is not hard to make. So just if you're talking about it in August, just set an October date, and then do it, and don't move it at all. Even if 3 days before you're like, guys, we're not ready, let's put it off. Do it anyway. Just show up and do it. That's something that I repeat very often to people. The other thing I find myself telling to people is, really, you should not even be spending 1% of your time thinking about networking, branding, connections, website, graphics, logos. Like, you should not be talking about that stuff. You know, like, literally, or production companies. This thing of like, we're starting a production company, usually becomes like a 2 or 3 year conversation about what is our logo and how are we going to put ourselves out there and make people aware of your production company. Well, no one's going to care about your production company until you make one thing that's interesting. So I advised someone the other day, I was like, forget about the company. Just forget about the company. Just do the thing. Do the first thing. And then the company will rise on its own. So those I think are my 2 little practical pieces of advice.
I think that's, really good advice. I feel like what makes your films stand out is the relatability of the characters to the audience and how real their reactions are to certain events in the story. How do you achieve genuine performances from the actors?
Thank you for saying that. There's this thing that happens when you make movies where people make observations after you make them that you didn't really notice. You know, there's a certain way that the characters behave and that the actors communicate in my films that I'm not really consciously doing or choosing to do. It's just sort of the thing. You know, I imagine that's true for painters, sculptors, novelists. You know, it's like, I made the thing I made, so you tell me what you see. But I will say that for me, casting the most interesting, human, lovely actors that you can find, taking some risks, maybe casting against type a little bit, and then not micromanaging them. Just saying, you own this now. I will say things to you as needed, but do your thing. And there's no pressure to start when I say action, and there's no pressure to get it right the first time. It's just creating an atmosphere in which they feel like nothing they do could be wrong. And I think that's ultimately it. It's just a very, if you ever come on one of my sets, I think, well, people are very surprised at how chill it is. Like, it doesn't actually feel like anything's happening. And I think that's the idea, is to make sure no one catches you being anxious or worried. You probably know that it's a college filmmaking cliche that everyone's kind of high strung all the time, and like, how are we going to do this? And oh my God. And it's just so important to hide that, I think, from the actors. And because then they'll be like, oh wow, like, this is a really comfortable place to be, you know? It's making sure you never raise the alarm. I mean, the worst thing you could say to an actor is like, you have to get it now because we have to move on. I mean, that's like the worst thing to say. And you just have to take the pressure off. It has to feel really nice and comfortable.
Definitely agree. And just like, even if people are asking you a million questions, like, you just gotta like take a breather sometimes.
Yeah, and enjoy, and also, and just enjoy the fact that you're on a set and not like sitting at a desk at an accounting firm or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not the end of the world. It's just a movie. Like, you're doing a movie. That's amazing. Like, what if like 8-year-old you could know this? You know, they'd be the coolest thing in the world. I feel like even at the highest stakes moment on a set, no one should forget that it's play and that they're very lucky to be there.
Do you have any advice for other coming of age writers?
That would fall under the category of question I've never been asked, which is very rare, and I like that. I mean, I don't really. It's really, honestly, I'm like, you know.
How do you make, like, there's so many coming of age films, especially now. How do you make yours stand out?
I think you have to, it's like, you know, it just goes back to when we talked in the beginning of like, you can't just want to make a coming of age film. You have to be in love with this and this world and this environment. And you have to, in some ways, even if it's not you, you have to feel like you're making a movie about yourself, even if it's not you, you know? And I think you have to find the heart of it in the world of it, the universe of it, because what are the things that take us most directly back into our adolescence? It's physical details, it's smells that we remember, and it's the feeling in our stomach when we saw someone for the first time. And if you aren't connecting with those sorts of environmental details, even as you start writing, then ultimately you're just going to be copying some movie that you like, and it's going to come off as a second-rate, maybe third-rate sort of knockoff. So it's like, what is unique about this? What do I feel about this? Where's my heart in this, I think?
I saw that most of your films are distributed by Wolf Video. Can you talk about your process of working with them?
Yeah, I mean, well, they're great. They're great. There aren't that many LGBT specialty distributors that have decent reputations, and they're one of them. One of the leading distributor of LGBT films, along with Strand. They're great. I have to be honest and say that I don't know anything else. I mean, I was very lucky to, there's a, you know, if you imagine the Venn diagram of like gay movie, good reviews, there's not that much overlap. So if you're able to make a good, this might sound cynical, but it's actually, I think, just true. If you're able to make a good movie that's also queer, someone's going to want to distribute it. And I can't say, I don't know what, if these exact movies had been made with these exact scripts, with the queerness removed, I cannot tell you where they would be. They might not have any life at all. And so you need Wolf to come in and be like, this is what we do. And they're great. They have very good relationships with a lot of people don't realize that it's not me dealing with Criterion and Netflix and Hulu directly, it's Wolf. So you sign over your movie and you hope that they have good relationships with those services. And then hopefully you get a random email from Wolf saying, hey, we just sold to Netflix, or hey, Criterion just pitched a series for 6 months.
Congrats on that, by the way.
Thank you. But that's the power of having a distributor. It's much harder. People have managed to get their movies on Prime, I think, maybe on their own. But Prime, I think I heard, pays like a nickel per hour or something. Like, it's a ridiculous, it's like nothing. So it's important that you have a distributor that will help you find those services. And I don't know what else to say. I don't know. I haven't worked with really any others, and so that I'm just grateful they were there. And again, if these weren't LGBTQ movies, I mean, they're good movies, but they don't have name actors in them. I don't know where the movies would be now without that sort of showcase.
Did you first go the festival route and then get distribution that way, or did you submit to them? How did it work?
No, it was all festivals. It was all festival play. And, I say this in the middle of this pandemic, which could be changing the festival landscape as we know it. But in the teens, that was how it went. You would premiere and then sometimes you'd have a sales agent for your premiere festival. That sales agent would start shopping it to distributors, and then hopefully you would get some offers. But now's a chance too for me to plug. I would be nothing if it weren't for regional festivals. I mean, I'm so proud about the Criterion thing. I'm so proud that Cyd was on Vanity Fair's best movies of the decade and all these amazing things. But I think it's important for people to remember that my movies didn't premiere at major festivals. My movies premiered at reputable regional festivals. And then over the course of a year, developed very slow burn word of mouth until, suddenly we were at the London Film Festival, and the London Festival thought we were fancier than we are. And then suddenly we have this word of mouth that builds out of a Maryland Film Festival or a Sidewalk or a Cucaloris or an Outfest or a Frameline. And then it just trickles throughout the year. And then by the end, if I can say somewhat, this is going to sound arrogant, but I'm just saying it for fun, but by the end of the year, the advantage of the slow burn is that by that point, there are movies that have played Sundance that have been forgotten about and are not being talked about anymore. And you're still alive because the climb has been very slow and deliberate. And so I just want to champion and encourage people to not just place all your bets on Sundance and South by and Tribeca, that there are a lot of really incredible showcases. BAM Cinema Fest was a huge thing. And to not place all your eggs in the basket of the major fest, because the downside of some of those fests is that if you premiere in a smaller section at a Sundance and there's 200 other movies, the risk is that no one's heard of you 2 months later. And so I'm a big advocate for slow and steady wins the race in terms of a career, obviously, and festivals.
So what's next for you?
Next for me is hopefully a movie made for more than $180,000. But no, that's it. I mean, that's been the real lesson of the last 4 years is at least I now know that if I want to, I can raise 200,000 or less for me if I get antsy. But that doesn't a career make. And if you do want your movies to be seen by a larger audience and you want to increase your budget and have more resources, none of which are bad, all of that is good. it takes a lot more time because you're more dependent on casting people that people recognize, and you're a little bit limited in the types of movies that, I can't just like pitch Princess Cyd to some big company and get $5 million for it. I mean, it's just not going to happen. So it's like, I just write a bunch. I put things out in the world. I have an agent and a manager now. I wait for answers from actors. And I hope that one of those projects will get made. But if it hasn't, in 2 years from now, I'm still like, oh my God, I can't believe I haven't made a movie since Princess Cyd. Then at least I know that I can go back to micro-budget filmmaking and make something special.
Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
It's been a great conversation. I think I learned a lot.
Good. I'm glad. That was the idea.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.